Hello again and welcome to the program. I am Suren. Why indeed people feel the necessity to believe in afterlife even without any religious input? Question. People feel often a necessity to believe in the afterlife due to the psychological desire for symbolic or literal immortality, perhaps, and their ability to counter out the fear of death. The intuitive cognitive tendency to project consciousness onto the dis-ease and the inherent comfort and meaning that a belief in continuation after death provides, even in the absence of religious input. Religious systems offer structured framework for these beliefs, but are not the only sources of such desires. As universal spiritual experience and universal human beliefs in this framework also play a great role. There is yet another theory. However, in practical sense, whether it works or not is just another story. We will talk about that in a different frame of time. But for now, let us just briefly mention it. Terror management theory. This theory suggests that fear of death motivates people to seek a sense of literal or symbolic immortality, which believes in an afterlife can provide. Cognitive biases. In our theory of mind, the ability to understand other people's thoughts and intentions, which can persist even after death, making it intuitive to believe in a continued psychological existence for the deceased, according to the New Scientist. Comfort and meaning. Believing in the afterlife can provide a sense of security, comfort, and purpose, helping people to make sense of their existence and the universe. Let us now consider the universal beliefs. Throughout history, we discover clearly across different cultures there have been beliefs in the survival of the human soul after death, indicating a common human tendency and inclination towards such ideas. Near-death experiences, or NDEs. A report of NDEs can reinforce the idea that consciousness continues beyond the body, suggesting a transition to another phase of existence, notes Salvos online. Spiritual connections. An individual's perceived being or connection, in fact eternal or transcendent being, often found in religious contexts, can lead to a belief in their own immortality and the continued afterlife. Here is an interesting consideration. In about 10 countries, the youngest adults were more likely than the oldest to say that they believed in reincarnation, defined by the survey respondents as they believed that people will be reborn in this world again and again. In most countries, there were no significant age-related differences. Nigeria, for example, was the only place surveyed where the oldest adults were more likely than the youngest adults to believe in reincarnation. As in the past surveys, we still find that older adults generally are more religious than younger adults when we ask about topics like a belief in God, attending religious services, and a personal religion. while 8 in 10 people aged 50 and older, as we discovered in Thailand, say that religion is very important in their lives. And only about half of Thai adults under 35 say the same. Previously, particularly in the US and some other parts of the world, a survey questionnaire had been posted about a specific vision of the afterlife, asking people whether they believed in heaven and also separately if they believed in hell. In this survey, to better allow comparisons across regions and religious traditions, we looked into simply about life after death issues. In most of the countries surveyed, a majority of adults said there is definitely or probably life after death. For example, 85% of adults in Muslim majority Indonesia said that this, as to the 80% of adults in Christian majority of Kenya, and across the 6 Latin American countries surveyed, about 2/3 of adults believed there is an afterlife. In a few countries, adults aged 18 to 34 are more likely to consider that adults aged 50 and older to say there is an afterlife. But in the US and Canada, the oldest adults are slightly more likely than the youngest adults to believe in life after death. In the US, 70% of adults say there is definitely or probably life after death. By comparison, 67% of Americans report believing in heaven, and 55% say they believe in hell. And the 2023 and 24 US Religious Landscape Study confirmed this. We can, of course, compare the results across the spectrum of measures, if you like. Many of the countries surveyed, substantial shares of adults said religion is very important in their lives. This is especially true for countries in South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America, and less so for Western Europe. The US is roughly in the middle of the pack, with 38% of the Americans are saying that the religion is very important in their lives. Large percentages of people in most of the countries surveyed also express belief in life after death and say that animals, even parts of nature, objects as mountains, rivers, or trees, or other physical objects such as crystals, jewels, and even the stones, can have spirits. Well, there is no clear and widely accepted dividing line between religion and spirituality. And this question shows that even in countries which were compared, a few people view religion as being very important. People do hold beliefs in spirits and or life after death. For example, relatively few Swedish adults, 7%, say religion is very important to them. But more Swedes, 38%, believe there is definitely or probably life after death. And nearly 2/3 believe in the spirits of animals, parts of nature, or objects. On the other hand, India is among the countries where a high proportion of adults let's say 82%, describe religion being very important in their lives. The vast majority, 91%, also say that animals, parts of nature of objects, can have spirits or spiritual energies. Indians, 43%, less than people in many of the other countries surveyed, believe in an afterlife, but about half of Indian adults, 48%, believe in reincarnation. The survey shows that some measures of religion and spirituality are strongly related to each other around the world. For example, people who say religion is very important in their lives often are more likely than others to fast during holy times, like Ramadan, to pray daily, and to believe that spells, curses, or other magic can influence people's lives. But the importance of religion is not strongly associated within some other measures, such as the belief that animals can have spiritual energies, and they believe in reincarnation. For more on how different measures of spirituality and religiousness relate to each other, you may read how new findings compare with long-standing measures of religiousness later. There are books and programs and literature on the social media. These are among the key findings from surveys of more than 50,000 adults collected by Pew Research Center in 36 countries. Surveys outside the US were conducted from January through to May 2024. Survey data for the US comes from two waves of the census. American Trends panel conducted in summer 2023 and February 2024, as well as from the most recent US religious landscape study, conducted in July 2023 through to March 2024. Globally, however, some amount of interviews were conducted in several dozen languages. For more information on how the data was collected in each country, you may also discover by reading the methodology thereof. Scholars have long studied the relationship between economic development and religion, with a circularization theory broadly positing that societies are becoming more economically and technologically advanced. Religion and/or religious values increasingly less important in people's lives. This theory continues to be debated, but international survey data has demonstrated a general pattern in which people in wealthier countries tend to pray less often, and to believe in God as less important for morality, while people in less economically advanced countries tend to describe religion as more important in their lives. There you have it. The economic pattern continues to hold for traditional measures of religiousness, such as the importance of religion, daily prayers, and belief in a God, within the 36 countries analyzed in this report. However, levels of national income are much less clearly correlated with some of the newer questions in the survey about religious and spiritual beliefs, such as the belief in the power of ancestral spirits and the existence of something spiritual beyond the natural world. Let's talk about the importance of religion. Some people in each country who say religion is very important in their lives broadly follows what circularization theory would also predict. Wealthier countries, those with higher per capita gross domestic product, GDP, tend to have lower shares of adults who say religion is very important in their lives, with a fairly strong correlation. In 11 countries, around 8 in 10 or more adults say religion is very important to them, and all these countries have relatively low GDP per capita. They include Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, and Muslim majorities. In 11 countries, only 2 in 10 adults were saying religion is very important in their lives, and all 11 are relatively wealthy countries, measured by GDP per capita. They include places with strong ties to Buddhism and Christianity, though most currently have large percentages of religiously affiliated adults compared to high-income countries, which stand out on this measure. Singapore and the US have the highest per capita GDP of the countries surveyed, yet they fall in the middle on the question about religion's personal importance, with 45% of Singaporeans and 38% of Americans saying religion is very important in their lives. The correlation between economic advancement and religiousness also holds for several other measures, including religious service attendance, belief in God, and belief that spells, curses, or other magic can influence people's lives. Of these questions, wealthier countries tend to be the least religious, with less advanced economies are generally the most religious. Let's consider also the beliefs that ancestors can affect the living. But the connection between economics and spirituality is not always so strong. For example, the correlation is much weaker on a question about whether ancestral spirits can help or harm the living. Some of the less economically developed countries we surveyed have the highest shares of people who believe that the spirits of ancestors can intervene in our lives. And Kenya, 63%, and South Africa, 79% fall into that category. And so, economics is not the only factor at play. The religious makeup of a country also has a role. For instance, the Muslim majority countries of Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Turkey also are among less wealthy countries in this survey. Yet, people in those countries are among the least likely to say ancestors can interact with a living in these ways. Something spiritual beyond the natural world. One measure of spirituality has basically no relationship with the country's level of economic development. Living in a wealthier country is generally not correlated with higher or lower shares over adults who say there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, even if we cannot see it, rather than selecting the alternative response that the natural world is all there is. The US and Sweden, for instance, each of the highest per capita GDPs in their survey, Yet a majority of US adults, 79%, say there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, while Swedish adults, 46%, are among the least likely to say this. Likewise, the countries with the lowest per capita GDPs represent a wide range of views on whether there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, from 86% in Ghana, for example, to 40% in the Philippines. Differences by religious groups. Let's consider. Well, level of economic development seem to be connected to some aspects of spirituality and religion. We also see significant patterns based on religious identity. The nuances of these patterns vary depending on this specific measure. But in general, people who are religiously unaffiliated, for example, those who describe themselves as atheists or agnostics or nothing in particular and are sometimes referred to as religious nuns, tend to be less religious than people who affiliate with a religion within each country. For example, in Germany, Christians are twice as likely as adults with no religion to say there is definitely or probably life after death. 62% versus 30%. And in nearly every country with enough Muslims to analyze separately, a majority of Muslims say there is life after death. Only in India do fewer than half of Muslims, that is about 42%, believe in an afterlife. Meanwhile, majority of adults in the US and in Israel, the only countries in the survey with sufficient samples of Jews to analyze, are much less likely than Muslims in the same two countries to believe in an afterlife. A different pattern emerges by comparing the shares of people who say they light incense or candles for spiritual or religious reasons, as it is in Israel and the US, wherein Jews are the most likely religious group to follow this practice. Muslims in both countries are much less likely to say they light candles or incense for religious or spiritual reasons. Across the other 34 countries surveyed, the Hindus and Buddhists tend to be the most likely to light incense or candles for spiritual or religious reasons. In India, for instance, nearly all Hindus follow this practice, and about 2/3 of Muslims also do so. And in countries with sufficient subsizes to analyze Hindus and Buddhists separately, but those two groups are consistently the most likely to say they believe in reincarnation, a mainstream teaching in both religions. For decades, researchers have relied on some core measures of religious identity, beliefs, and practices to assess the religiousness of individuals and societies by asking questions. What is your current religion? For instance, how important is religion in your life? How often do you pray? How often do you attend religious services? Do you believe in God? These measures are strongly associated with each other. If a person prays daily, that individual is significantly more likely than adults who will pray less often to consider religion to be very important. In Argentina, for example, 60% of adults who pray daily say that religion is very important in their lives, compared with 21% of Argentines who pray less often. Meanwhile, in Japan, 23% of those who pray daily say that religion is very important. Just 3% of Japanese adults who pray less often say religion is very important in their lives. But what happens when we compare these long-standing measures of religiousness with the newer questions, including those within this particular survey? The results depend on the measures used. In general, there is a strong association between standard measures of religious commitment and whether people believe in life after death or not. In Israel, for example, adults who pray daily are twice as likely as those who pray less often to believe there is life after death, 90% versus 45%. But on some other measures, there is only a weak alignment, or even none at all. In most countries, adults who pray daily, not necessarily significantly, differ from those who pray less often in their inclination to believe that animals also have spirits, or in the likelihood that they consult a fortune teller or use other ways to see the future. This may reflect the fact that these beliefs and practices are less orthodox or central to the dominant faith traditions in many countries. Recently, Americans have become less likely to identify with an organized religion. Yet a new Pew Research Center survey shows that belief in spirits or a spiritual reality beyond this world is widespread, even among those who do not consider themselves religious. In general, 70% of US adults can be considered spiritual somehow because they think of themselves as spiritual people and say spirituality is very important in their lives. These amount to the key findings of a new Pew Research Center survey of American spirituality, conducted on July 31st of August and 6th, 2023, among a nationally representative sample of 11,201 members of American Trends Panel. Survey shows that Americans' beliefs about spirits and the afterlife. An overwhelming majority of US adults, 83%, say that they believe that people have a soul or spirit in addition to their physical body. A smaller majority, that's 57%, believes that animals other than humans can't have their own spirits or spiritual energies. Half of the Americans believe that spirits can inhabit burial places such as graveyards, cemeteries, or other memorial sites. And a similar share, 48%, saying that parts of the natural landscape, such as mountains, rivers, can have spirits or spiritual energies, like the American Indians, for instance. About a quarter of US adults believe that spirits or spiritual energy can reside in certain objects, such as crystals, jewels, or stones, 26%. Believe it or not. What do Americans believe about life after death, would you say? The survey finds that 71% of Americans believe in heaven. Well, so much fewer, 61% believe in hell, and 60% believe in both. These numbers have held steady in recent years, but there is less consensus about whether the dead have various powers, such as the ability to follow what is happening in this world and to watch out for loved ones who are alive. We explore these beliefs for the first time by asking whether it is definitely true, probably true, or probably not true, or definitely not true, that people who have already died can do a variety of things. Respondents also were able to say they were not sure. More than half of US adults, 57%, believe that in the afterlife, people definitely or probably cannot reunite with loved ones who also have died. About 4 and 10 or more Americans say that probably can't exist, protect, or guide the living, 46%. Be aware of what's going on about the living, 44%. Or communicate with people who are still living, 42%. US adults are more than twice as likely to say that the dead can help the living, 46%, as they are to say that the dead can harm the living, that is 18%. About a quarter of US adults believe it is definitely or probably true that the dead can be reincarnated, 27%, defined in the survey as being reborn again and again in this world. Spiritual experiences and practices. Some kinds of spiritual experiences seem to be relatively common. For example, 46% of US adults say that at least once or twice a month they feel a deep sense or wonder about the universe. A similar share, 44%, say they feel a deep sense of spiritual peace and well-being. Feeling a deep sense of connection with humanity and feeling the presence of something from beyond this world are less common. Still, about 1 in 5 of Americans and more say they have such feelings at least once or twice a month. To gauge experiences that may be relatively rare, we ask the respondents whether they have ever had specific other worldly experiences. Fully, 45% say they have had such sudden feeling of connection with something from beyond this world, and 38% say they have had a strong feeling that someone who previously passed away was communicating with them from beyond this world. 3 out of 10 say they believe in spirits or unseen spiritual forces, and also say that they have personally encountered one. How do Americans practice spirituality? To measure some common spiritual practices, it was asked in the survey of the respondents how often they pursue 5 activities, looking for or engaging themselves, meditating, doing yoga, exercising, and spending time in nature. Where these activities of spiritual kind depend, of course, one's definition of spirituality. As previously noted, many Americans explain the meaning of spiritual by talking about various kinds of connections, such as with God or something bigger than themselves, with their innermost, with loved ones who have died, or even with all humanity. With that understanding of spirituality in mind, we asked survey respondents to select the most important reason why they engage in each of these activities. Is it to feel connected with something bigger than themselves, with their true self, or with other people? Is it to get health benefits, including relaxation? To have fun and enjoy the experience, or for other reasons? A total of 77% of US adults say they spend time in nature at least a few times a month, and 26% say they do so mainly to feel connected, such as with something bigger than themselves, 18%, or with their true self, 6%. Half of America say they spend time in nature mainly for health benefits, to enjoy themselves, or for other reasons. By comparison, few Americans, 64%, say they look inward or send themselves at least a few times each month. But a relatively large share, 44% of all US adults, say they look or send themselves mainly to feel connected, including 27% who do it mainly to feel connected with their true self. Roughly 4 in 10 Americans meditate at least a few times a month, 38%, including 22% of US adults who meditate mainly to connect with their true self, 11%, or with something bigger than themselves, 10%. Americans seem to be more likely to report gathering in religious communities than meeting in spiritual groups. Fully, 39% of US adults say they are involved in a religious community, such as a church or religious congregation, while 14% say they are involved in a spiritual community, such as a group that helps them find the connection with something bigger than themselves, nature, or other people. Most people who are involved in a spiritual community are also involved in a religious one. 10% of US adults say they are involved in both kinds of groups, while just 4% of all US adults say they are involved in a spiritual community and not a religious one. Sounds very much like Australia. Our social studies in society all around the world, one of which considers the injustice of life, therefore it would be difficult to believe life is good if we knew there was nothing beyond the grave to compensate for problems of inequality and fairness. Some people seem destined for happiness. Others are born into terrible relationships and circumstances. Consider. There's also much about life that does not seem to correspond with personal problems of unfairness and hardship. However, for all that is painful and unequal, there is beauty and balance found everywhere. For moments of horror and violence, there are times of harmony and peace. As each one succumb to pain and weakness, children and young animals play with carefree joy. Human art, in all its glory, corresponds to birds in playful flight and a morning song. The sunset and sunrise provides an answer to nature's need to rest and renewal. Cold winters and dark nights come with the awareness that too shall pass. If there is nothing beyond the grave, the pattern of nature is stunningly incomplete. What about the near-death experiences? The clinical evidence for life after death is subjective and certainly very arguable and debatable. It's often hard to assess the significance of the body experiences, encounters with bright lights, long tunnels, or angelic guides. It is indeed difficult to know how to respond to those who speak of temporary near-death visions into heaven or hell. What we do know is that there are enough of these kinds of experiences to create a sizable library on the subject. Take it as a whole. This evidence shows that people approach death many sense. They are coming not to the end of existence, but to the beginning of another journey. Peace in the heart. Human heart hungers for more than this life offers. Each one experiences what King Solomon calls eternity in the heart. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. It is difficult to know what is meant with that. It is probably a part of which was referring to one's longing or something this world cannot satisfy. It was something that King Solomon could not escape. For a while, he tried to fill this void with work, with wine and laughter. He certainly tried to satisfy his longings with philosophy, music, and relationships. But his disillusionment grew. However, when his confidence in a final judgment grew in the afterlife, could he find something large enough to satisfy his longing for significance? Chapter 12, verse 14. In Ecclesiastes. Some tend to believe that it is impossible to know whether there is a life after death. Believing in immortality is timeless. From the pyramids of the Egyptians to the reincarnation of the New Age thinking. People of all ages and places in history have believed that the human soul survives death. If there is no consciousness or laughter or regret beyond the grave, then life is lost almost for everyone from the pharaohs of Egypt to the Jesus of Nazareth. Jonathan Young writes on death, anxiety, and religion. The fear of death is commonly hypothesized as a motivation for religious belief. From a terror management theory perspective, religious beliefs are especially attractive because they offer both literal and symbolic immortality in the form of afterlife beliefs and belonging in memorable or vulnerable systems of value respectively. However, the evidence of any relationship, whether correlation or causal dash between death, anxiety, and religious belief is weak. Indeed, evidence for death, anxiety under normal, non-life-threatening circumstances is surprisingly hard to find. If the fear of death motivates religiosity, it does so subtly, weakly, and sporadically. A population opinion joins by scholars throughout the ages. Theorists of religious or religion opposite the fear of death among the chief causes of religious belief include David Hume in the 18th century, Ludwig Feuerbach in the 19th, and Sigmund Freud in the 20th century. However, in Becker's work, that the fear of death really takes sense to stage, not only in a functional analysis of religion, but as a fundamental driver of all human societies and cultural activity. Theory has been translated into social psychological terms with remarkable success as terror management theory, or TMT. On the literal side, we seek various means to prolong our lives, whether through exercise or biotechnological enhancements. On the symbolic side, we learn to live on in our offspring and our moral and material accomplishments within the value systems we inhabit. Religion, therefore, appears to be an especially attractive immortality project, as many religious traditions offer both literal and symbolic immortality through their accounts of an afterlife and morality and priority respectively. However, until recently, the empirical research on TMT has largely neglected religion, and the most recent analysis of TMT research, only 8 of the 277 collated effects can possibly be considered to be about religion. This review will examine the more recent literature and religion in times, but by looking at coronal evidence for the relationship between death, anxiety, and religiosity. I don't think anxiety and religion or religious thought are a separate part correlated. It is not clear what one to predict about the relationship between trait levels of religious and getting anxiety. On the other hand, if death motivates religious day, then we might expect the two variables to be positively correlated. Religious effectiveness reduces death anxiety. Then we might expect a negative correlation. One way to resolve this contradiction is to opposite relationship, such as the causal direction of the relationship changes as, and it continues. Does mortality sense increase religiosity? We may need to look now to the experimental evidence. The first experiment on this topic actually predates terror management theory. It has been found that those who had previously expressed belief in an afterlife reported stronger belief. Participants who were told to expect electric shocks, also an anxiety-inducing experience. We are not affected at all. It is very hard to say what to make of it all. There are plenty of correlational studies on death anxiety and religions, and survey of this literature suggests no linear relationship between them, or it is a very weak negative one. There are much fewer experimental studies, and these studies admit much less cultural diversity. Consider for a moment a few logical and probably philosophical points in regard to belief systems and beyond faith issues, beyond creators, and beyond evolution. Science has no proper answers, and religion cannot truly show us that there is an afterlife, and there is also reincarnation. What is the use and the reason of reincarnation? Question. We are told that it is to improve our lives and become perfect humans. It is certainly commendable and, in fact, almost logical. But we don't have any memory of our past lives, although we are told through regression sessions that we had a past. In other words, we are being recycled without any memory or no plausible or probable history. In other words, what we remember doesn't exist. If this is so, how is it possible for us to improve our status and become better human beings without any knowledge of what we have done wrong? Remembering our past. It is not good enough to say that we are sinners, so we have to believe in order to be saved. For what? Universe is a very big place, Maybe there are creative minds that we cannot even pinpoint and study because we have not known anything, as we are still in a very primitive state, living in a very primitive but extraordinarily beautiful world. We are told that we are the generations developed through an evolution from the apes. This at least comes to a reasonably logical conclusion, but the questions still remain. Did we really originate from apes? Or are we just placed here on this planet by some higher intelligence or by ourselves? We have no idea about our past, and if there was any reincarnation in which we may have been kings and queens, or street cleaners, or lamppost erectors, sailors, dealers, and thieves. Of course, when regression sessions are conducted, we're all kinds of kings and queens, and something always of the elite class. Just think about that, and none of them really makes any sense. There is no evidence that we can pinpoint to be absolutely real, because during those sessions we may quite easily be influenced, or we may have read a book or internalized it, making it a part of our past history, for we long and need to make that so. Then, of course, the question arises. Tell us more about the reality, as we need to know our past history to make some sense of it all. And maybe we do even need not to know it. But if we do, then all our scientists have been sent to this world, our inventors who have been invented something or discovered things and did their job and went awaiting for their next incarnation, perhaps to do some street cleaning, or perhaps even with the memories remembered to continue with their projects while living longer, so that we can continue on with our projects. Consider. None of these seem to happen at this stage, and we are only talking about utopian viewpoints. We still conduct wars and fight each other for petty concerns, whether religious, cultist, sectarian, or whatever else. We have not been yet civilized, and knowledge is being put under cover so that we cannot see, let alone observe it when we study our past. How can we say that we lived before? Maybe in our dreams. Our dreams are the real stuff in the universe that we all tend to ignore in our physicality. Is it the real thing? The universe we observe seems to exist for a very long time, and we are part of that universe. Why don't we know what really happens after we depart? Logically, we are meant to exist long time. Remember, we are told and discovered that energy cannot be annihilated. We are indeed part of that energy, and the energy that makes up the whole universe. It may change shape and format, and all sorts of things may happen, but the energy itself cannot die. Therefore, how can we even suggest that we don't exist anymore after death? Once we are gone and dead, are we dreaming of dying? How can we do so when there is no consciousness? What is going on? Religion has no answer, nor our sciences can find a logical conclusion. We aim to become richer and better at the end. Everything is just like foam at the seashore that comes and goes. A candle flickers and burns down to its ember, yet the energy is not lost. It's still there. So where did it all go? When we die, we say all our consciousness is also gone, for it is dependent on the living brain, and the living brain cannot generate any thoughts or consciousness after its demise. Any consciousness then can certainly not exist. How do we know? Well, we have near-death experiences, don't we? And if we start writing about them, we may fill huge libraries with books on related subjects. Does that explain everything? And everything we don't even know of? Do we really understand life and the universe? We have no idea what it is and what it is for, and only trying to understand, and the science doesn't take note of it, though men's religions try to understand and answer our deepest feelings and questions, but they don't seem to do a good job. What is the reality? Question. Do we really live on after some form of recycling? Death is the end, the unknown mystery of life. And after death, we still question, is there a reincarnation? And why? Just consider. I intend to end this session today, till we meet again. Until then, keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.